So there's a lot that went into putting this and setting this up. Do me a favor, please. If you find any of this content useful or creative or you like it, number one, comment down below, I like it. Fantastic job. Number two, do not hesitate to hit that like button. Please. I need every like I can on my videos because my videos are lacking and lagging on the likes because of my subpar content. And number three, it helps the algorithm for YouTube to push the video more. I would really appreciate it. Please and thank you. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having a fantastic day. There's a couple of things I need to get out into the blue, clear my chest kind of thing. First, I want to apologize if the content has kind of been subpar. It's extremely hard to make content and build at the same time. Very difficult. Number two, if you're not subscribed and you find any kind of value in any of the videos that I do, please consider subscribing. Please consider subscribing. That was like almost like a tongue twister. And number three, I want to just say I appreciate each and every one of you guys that, especially the ones that comment on the videos, that interact with me. I find that extremely important. So, now that I've cleared my chest, let's show you what we're working on today. All right, so in the last video, we went over the body mounts for the crew cab long bed S10. I've got body bushings coming in a day. I believe tomorrow they're going to be here. So I don't want to mess with these until I have the body bushings. So that's number one. But at least I have the braces made, sort of kind of ready to go. What I have been working on though is strengthening up the front of the chassis. I think I was saying in the last video how there was no strength up front in the bumper. The bumper is almost like a tin can kind of sort of. So if he had gotten into an accident, there's no structural support up front. So what I did was I made a cross member to tie the rails together. I made and bent up a plate to wrap the corner of the chassis. These holes that are here, I'm going to drill out and tap just for aesthetics. Some socket cap screws or button head screws, you may want to call them. I've got this is the core support mount. This is the bumper mount. And this is the bumper mount. So currently what I'm working on is I've taken some cardboard, made this shape by laying the cardboard inside, tracing it out. Got our front section set up. Level as money. Remember, this is the core support. This is for the bumper. These are for the bumper. I just popped a hole in there for aesthetics because it was just a giant chunk of metal. I got to finish shaping it a little bit more. It's hard to, close to the table. I still got to drill this side out, drill weld from underneath, shape the brackets up a little more. But that looks good, man. Ran out of flap discs, so we're going to run up to Home Depot, get some flap discs, some grinding discs, some cutoff wheels, and get back to it. So now I've got my reamers. I'm going to end up having to ream out these ball joints, the uppers and lowers. These are drop spindles for a S10. I believe they're Beltex. I think. I don't know. Scotty gave them to me for his truck. But yeah, got to open them up. He's got a nice set of big brakes for these. So we're going to use these, obviously. Trying to keep everything as much as possible S10. So aside of the ball joints, you know, if he has to get parts for it, pretty easy. We're going to use these. This is basically like a Mustang 2 setup. you slide some DOM tubing over these bushings, and then once you're all set with the tubing, then you can bend up some control arms. So these work good. These are really nice. I like them. You make a mount, set it at the caster at like 7.5 degrees, and then you can just shim it to correct your caster or anything of that nature. But that's basically what I'm going to use for there. And then I've got a setup that's getting machined for the lowers. I should have it back by the end of the week. Got to make some brackets on that. But more importantly, now that I have the ball joints, I've got to set them into the spindle to determine the pivots. So if the ball joint's in, and you measure from pivot to pivot, let's say for argument's sake that's 10 inches, your mounts need to be 10 inches. It's no different than setting up a parallel 4-link suspension. Super important, setting your pivots properly. And once I have my pivots set up, then I can go ahead and order a rack and pinion, let them know, hey, here's my pivots, which is your mounts, upper and lower. The rack pivot needs to fall in between here, and there we go. So that's basically how that's going to work. But I can't do nothing until I get the rest of the pieces. I mean, I could start making stuff, but again, like I said, I'm missing pieces. So I'm just trying to keep busy, and I'm making the bushings for the upper control arms. This is 1.5 inch, excuse me, DOM pipe tube, and I need it at 1 3/8 inches. We're going to cut it just on 1 3/8 inches. I'll show you what I need to do to make this work. So I've gone to Alro 101 times. This is some China bushing. Obviously you see it doesn't fit inside of here. This is the closest tube that I could find for this bushing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this DOM and we're going to make it seamed tube. So I'm going to lock this in the vise. So I've cut a sliver out of it. You see the sliver? There, it just fell on the floor. So now, what we do is we take this and we lock this in the vise. Let's do it this way. Now, what we're going to do is slide the bushing in. Side here, tighten the vise up. Obviously that's still way too loose. That should be good. Yeah. Put a tack and a tack on it and then seam it right up. Like so. I believe this is 3/16 wall. Plenty strong enough. And when I bend up my control arm, just want to show you something really quick. Hopefully I have it, and I don't. But since the seam is right here, I'll notch the tube over the seam, and that'll reinforce it solid, nicey nice. So it's good stuff, man. So one of the things I forgot to mention to you guys, I just want to show you something real quick. This is 1.5" DOM, or was 1.5" DOM. Now, the uppers are going to consist of 1.25" tubular control arms. Picked up a hefty section of it the other day. This is, again, 3/16 wall. These are going to be the uppers. So the uppers are going to be 1.25", and the lowers are going to be my little supply here, 1.5". This is 3/16 wall, plenty strong enough. So it's kind of why I'm setting this stuff up. Obviously, you all know I don't have the bender, the die for my bender. Hot. Still waiting on that. I should have ordered it a while ago and I never did. I don't know, I wasn't thinking. I thought 1 inch would have been fine. 1 inch is good for the Samurai, not for a full size. And this isn't even a full size, but you get what I'm saying. You know, mid size. So 1.25" uppers, 1.5" lowers. Full size would have been 1.75" lowers and 1.5" uppers. Plenty beefy. These are the upper ball joint rings. They're only 1 inch in diameter. So what I'm going to need to do is go back to Alro. This is 2.25" DOM. They just ran a tap through it to put threads in it. I need to add a section onto this because let's just say, for argument's sake, this is more like 1 3/8" now. You can see the difference. Let's do it like this. That's not right. The ring is too small. But you see the lower, these are the lower rings. They machined them out of DOM. Let's say, for argument's sake, I was going to use these 1.5". See, you could get that to work. That you're not getting to work. It's not gonna, I mean, you could, but I'm not. I'm gonna add, like I said, I'm gonna add material to it. I know you guys are gonna forget, but these are the little details. If you pay attention to the videos, you know, it'll make sense when I start putting it all together. All right, guys, so I wanted to set up a table, lay out some numbers so I can come up with an idea on how long my control arms are going to be, on where I'm going to place my upper control arm and lower control arm, where I'm going to place my bag, and some other little boundaries that I have to contend with. So what I've done is I've set the spindle, so lower ball joint, upper ball joint, where the spindle needs to be. Now, keep in mind, this is half scale. So the chassis width is 29.25 inches. The track width, which is inside of fender to inside of fender, is a total of 63 inches. It's really more like 62 because the fender curves. But we're going to call it 63. So you take 63 inches, track width, outside to outside chassis, 29.25, you minus the 2, and what you're left with is your control arms. So we're left with 32.75 inches. Obviously, you're going to divide that by 2 because you have 2, a right side and a left side. You're left with 16.3/8. Now, for rounding purposes and for marginal error purposes, because shit happens, I'm just going to call this 16 inches and we'll get lucky and use that 3/8 of an inch later on down the road. So now I'm going to remove this spindle. And what I've done is, you can see I've drawn a line with my speed square. Again, if you do not have one of these, go to the hardware store and buy one. They're super cheap. They're adjustable. Pop you a line in for your lower ball joint. Pop you a line for your upper ball joint. And now what we can do is we can remove this. And we're left with a table full of numbers. So now I know the wheel that's on the ground over there is 20 by 9. It's really a 20 by 8, but outside to outside is 9 inches with an offset of 4.5. So the way Detroit Steel wheel made it, the pocket is recessed and basically center of the wheel. So, okay. Here's our frame rail. It's 10 inches high off the ground. Measured out 16 inches. This is our face of spindle. Added another 4.5 inches for our track width, which puts it at 32 inches, 16 inches. And again, remember, we're still left with 3/8 of an inch, which we'll use later on down the road. So technically it's supposed to be longer. Now, we measured up 18 inches because 18 inches is where the fender opening is, the bottom of the fender. Then you've got some little bump that's right here. And then your fender starts to curve inwards towards the hood. It's a little more gradual, but I ran out of wood. So just giving you the idea of what's going on here. So what I did was I made a makeshift spindle. Okay. This mark right here is your center where your spindle would be. So we're going to stick this here. Mind you, it's a 26-inch tall tire. This would be 26 inches. From here to here is 13 inches. And what I've done is I've taken some self-tappers. I drilled them through, grounded them off, so I can simply sit this inside of here like so. Same with the bottom, except I didn't grind this one off. Now, please keep in mind there's a lot to take in here. It looks very simple, but I promise you there's probably a couple of hours worth of work figuring all these numbers out. I encourage you to try it. Pause the video, take some notes, and then try, designing your own suspension on your own free time. So now, let me raise this up a little bit because I have a feeling, no, we're good. Awesome. So what I like to do is, keep in mind, this is the bottom of the ground. The cross member in the vehicle now curves like this, okay? Our oil pan is, I believe, 4 inches off the ground. 4.25. 4.25 inches off the ground currently. And again, we can change things later on down the road. That's why I only tack things into place. So what you're going to want to do is your lower pivot and your upper pivot need to be the same. Now I went ahead and set this up at 10 inches, pivot to pivot, which is your ball joint upper and your lower. Where they move, okay, is 10 inches. That's telling me to keep this parallel that it has to be at 10 inches. So I drew some lines from the ground up I created a line. This is 1.25 inches. Then I went 1 inch. Then I went 2 inches. So now I've drilled holes pretty much every 1/2 inch in increments. Okay? Again, it's a lot to take in. So I have to do this because the customer has a very specific wheel. And if I don't do this, there's going to be tons of guessing games later on down the road. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. Maybe I should have this way. Let's do it on some wood, figure it out, and then build it on the chassis. So we're going to start by setting it up at our first line we drew, which is 1.25 inches off the ground. And then we're going to set the upper on our first line. Let me put a little mark here. This is line number 1. This is line number 2. This is line number 3. And same down here. 3, 2, 1. Okay? So now if you cycle the suspension, you see the suspension travels really nice, but we're running into an issue. So what's happening is when this is bottomed out, when you raise the suspension, the arc from the suspension is pushing the wheel into the fender, which is no bueno. Customer, again, wants a very specific wheel with a very specific offset. So we have to figure out a better way. This is not going to work. What we do is we go, okay, let's go in 1 inch and test it. So go here. Now we go here, like so. Now we moved it in 1 inch. We put it back on our center mark as the suspension's aired out. We go ahead and raise the truck up and we say, oh shit, she's still coming into play. It's not gonna work right there. We basically need another 1/2 inch. Fair enough. Take your screw out, move it 1/2 inch. You can just try the upper first. Your upper, you're obviously gonna have negative camber, LOL. And you can see that you will always have negative camber, but your arc is still here. And your tire is still almost into the inside of the fender. So this is not going to work. So we'll try moving the bottom in, since we only moved the top in, and see what happens. Put it back at center. Ah, see that? We're almost there. We're almost there. We could probably get away with this, but you know as well as I know that that shit's not going to fly. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it a step further. We're going to leave this where it is, and we're going to move. We're going to go up 1 inch. So we're going to pop our upper control arm in this hole. We're going to move this up a good inch. We're going to pop our lower in this hole, and we're going to cycle the suspension. Ah, what do you know? It actually works. So at roughly 5 inches of travel, our lower control arm is parallel to the ground, and you could see that the arc is very subtle. Now, granted, you know, these are 1 inch marks. I'm moving it, you know, quite a bit, 2 inches of stroke. I still don't like it. So what I can do is I can fine tune my settings here and see how I can get this to work a little smoother. We'll move it back a hole, and we're going to try it again. Now you see how the arc is still there, but it keeps behind our line. So this is a real nifty trick. I'm in the wrong setting, that's why. Dodo head. Sorry about that. Here we go. They were not parallel with one another. Okay, we can go forward an inch. Here's our bottomed out mark. 5 inches. Our control arm is parallel to the ground. And you can see that he has roughly from 4 inches to almost 7 inches of pretty steady, smooth suspension travel before the wheel starts moving in, being affected by the arc. Now, also, you need to keep in mind that I'm very limited room for the simple fact that this spacing is really screwing me up. So I have to cheat. I have to push the upper control arm back as far as I can to make this as long as possible. I need to push my lower control arm back to make this as long as possible to to calm the arc down. That's the word I'm looking for. And I believe there was another, yes, there was. There's another screw here. And watch what happens when I I made the arm longer, and look how less aggressive the arc is. And that's basically how I like to set my suspensions up. And now once I found, a combination, now it becomes, how in the hell am I going to stick a 2,600 pound bag? Because again, that's what the customer wants inside of this mumbo jumbo. So now for me, because every situation is different, this cross member is not going to work. Cross member is going to have to come out. I'm going to have to cut into the bottom side of the frame. And I'm going to have to figure a way on where to put the airbag. Now, again, keep in mind, a good rule of thumb is when your suspension is bottomed out, whatever degree this is, for argument's sake, let's say this is 25 degrees, your bag mount needs to be set at 25 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut into the bottom side of the frame rail. I'm going to recess his bag mount. And more than likely, I'm going to offset the angle to something along the lines of like this. His bolts will basically be at the face of the frame rail to take, remove your bag, and such. And I'm going to have to create a pocket on the lower control arm for the bag to be bolted to. Now, another thing to keep in mind is, let's just say for argument's sake that I use this exact location. We're going to pop a line right here. And what we do is we measure our control arm, which is 11.5. And our mark, you can see here, is at 6 inches. That is basically 50%, we can call it 55% of the lower control arm. That's how much pressure is going to be applied to the lower control arm. So we've got 6 inches here. We've got 5 1/4 here. 5 1/4, 5.5. I'll call 5.5. So ideally, you would like to mount the bag as further out as possible, but now you run into other scenarios where when you start to raise your suspension, your bag bellows and your bag wants to make contact with your ball joint. So these are things that I'm up against, and making this little jigsaw puzzle is going to help me come up with geometry for the front suspension. Also, something I want you to keep in mind is when you set your suspension up, your rack and pinion steering has to, and I repeat, has to fall inside of I'm gonna put a line here for this. This joint is your pivot off of your rack and pinion. This has to be in line inside of this pivot area. If your pivot on your rack and pinion is behind it or in front of it, when you raise and lower the suspension, your wheels are going to toe in and toe out. And we do not want that. So you take a Nissan, when you air a Nissan out or a Toyota out, and you see when they're laid on the ground, the wheels are pointed forward. That's because the tie rods are not inside of these pivots. And the way to correct it is cut and re-weld and, adjust your center link so your center link falls inside of your pivot zone. So I hope this helps. It's very simple. It's very rudimentary. I mean, there's nothing to it, but this is how I'm going to design the suspension for the Crew Cab S10, and it gives me a ballpark on how long I need to make my upper and my lower. And just to give you an example, like a Michigan Metalworks, upper control arm, tubular upper, I believe is around 7 inches, based off of a stock suspension. We're at 9 inches. And that's because I narrowed the width of the frame rails, installing mandrel bent rails, versus a stock S10 chassis where you would be left with a little itty bitty arm like this. And what happens now, I want to show you something else. When you have a little itty bitty arm like that, watch what happens to your suspension travel. So we're going to put her back here. Now, we're basically bound up at this point, and we're at almost at 5, 6, 7, almost at 8 inches, we'll call it, before it starts to sort of get crazy and wonky and bind itself up. So now we're going to put our control arms back. We're going to go back to our location. Now we're at basically 9 inches. We gained a good inch from extending the upper control arm. And also there's other things that factor into on how to gain more travel. But I just wanted to make this as simple as possible to where a caveman can set up and build a front suspension for their vehicle. Because I had several people ask me about it. Hey, what do you do with this and this and this? And well, this is exactly how I do it right here. So there's no rocket science behind it. There's no tricks or hidden, things. It's chassis rail, track width, back spacing, make it work. And this is what I've come up with. All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found value in this video. Got a fresh haircut. I was looking like a cheaphead. Hopefully next video, we're going to be making a mocked up version on the chassis. This way I can get a better idea of what I'm working with. I've got to pull the engine down. I've got a bunch of little things I got to do to prepare for mocking up the front suspension. So again, I appreciate each and every one of you. Please, if you like what you've seen, comment down below. If you don't like what you've seen, comment down below. If you found value in this, please consider subscribing. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will catch you on the next one. Take care.